Hi, welcome to Cubs in Culture for February 6th, 2018. I'm actually going to split this because I got to go to work in about an hour. I wanted to get at least this section recorded because I've been wanting to talk about this movie for a couple of days, and book. Our topic today is going to be Midnight Cowboy. It won Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Adapted Screenplay in 1969. It was also nominated for two lead actors, both Hoffman and Jon Voight, as well as Best Supporting Actress and Best Editing. I don't know if it's because I'm just in a particularly foul mood, because of what Trump said yesterday and some other stuff. But as I was rewatching it today, it really struck me, just how much I love and adore this film. And it's such a unique, I mean, there's other films like it, like Drugstore Cowboy with, I think Keanu Reeves is in that one. And other sort of, queerish cinema. But of all the Best Picture winners, it's, or sort of like movies that have had a deep influence on, the culture. It's such a odd movie to be included. Like, of all the Best Picture winners, it's the one that feels the least like a Best Picture winner, to me on sort of multiple fronts. And it's shocking to me that even to this day, even after like Moonlight won, that this film, which I'll talk briefly about the plot in a second, won Best Picture. So if you haven't seen it, it's basically a coming of age story of this naive is a good word, but also just not particularly intelligent. Like, he's earthy. Joe Buck is earthy. Not very sophisticated. A guy who goes to New York and he basically wants to be a male sex worker or a male prostitute. Mostly, he aims to be a gigolo, i.e. service female clients, but he ends up being a hustler, which is for servicing male clients. And so there's that. So, like, sort of like on content way, like it's about, there's explicit queer characters in this film. They're not the main characters, and although I think you can actually read both Joe Buck and Rico or Ratso as queerish characters, and I'll get into that in a second. But in terms of like, Moonlight's not the first film with explicit queer characters in it. Because one of his, two of his clients are men, and etc. So, like, in terms of like queer content, the only other two films that sort of have them before this one is Ben-Hur and Rebecca. But apart from that, and sort of like the tone of the film is, it's cynical is not the right word. It's about alienation. And sort of, I'll get into this more next session, about Lacanian gaps in sort of subjectivity. And so it's a sort of a deep indictment of American society, and it's a very pessimistic, not cynical, but pessimistic about the human condition, or at least America, or capitalism, or class society, or our system, however you want to put the point. Pessimistic about whether or not things will get better. So there's sort of films before that, before Midnight Cowboy or after Midnight Cowboy, that have sort of this pessimism or cynicism. In the Heat of the Night, No Country for Old Men, Lost Weekend, Godfather, both of them sort of have it. And then stylistically, the film is deeply influenced by the French New Wave stuff, which I'll spend an entire section talking about. And again, if you go through sort of the best pictures, you have Tom Jones that has a little bit of French New Wave in it. Then you have the French Connection, that is sort of indebted to the French New Wave, and then you also have Annie Hall, and then also later on, because in the '90s, French New Wave was so deeply influential that eventually even mainstream sort of films dealing with fractured narratives or split multiple people or location shooting or whatever. So you also kind of have like a Beautiful Mind or Slumdog Millionaire Crash has some ever so slight French New Wave. So you can point to various Best Picture winners that have things in common with Midnight Cowboy. But there's no other film in the Best Picture set that has that it's a sort of a Hollywood version of a French New Wave film about male prostitutes that takes a pessimistic view of American society. There's analogs for like style or analogs for like tone or analogs for like content, but never all three together. So you can point to like the French Connection and say, well, yeah, it's somewhat shot similar. It's shot on the streets of New York, but it's so uniquely unto itself in this one category that I still this day I do not understand how the fuck this film in 1969 won Best Picture, because it is so different from anything else on the Best Picture list, even if you want to point to films that have somewhat similar elements. Okay, so there's that. The other thing about this, and let me pause for a moment, is I don't believe a movie today with sort of this sort of content could be made. I don't think a mainstream like 20th Century Fox, I don't think they would risk even a nominally small budget to tell sort of the seedy story of American underbelly and male prostitution in New York City as sort of a coming-of-age story. And of course, the right, if it was released today, the right in this country would just scream and holler about sort of the gay agenda. Because the movie actually, it doesn't really judge any of its characters. Okay, so it judges, all the characters in the movie are very sympathetic. Or empathetic. Empathetic might be a better word. So it doesn't really, it treats hustling and sort of being a con artist as just like what you need to do to survive, and it's not moralistic in the sense that it judges like Joe or Ratso as being terrible people. It is moralistic because it's sort of condemning the entire system that forces people into that. In any case, the right would freak the fuck out about the gay agenda and sort of a empathetic, sympathetic portrayal of prostitution. The other thing is, I don't think the left today would countenance this sort of betrayal, because there are sort of elements which I think are truthful for the characters or sort of the setting or sort of the truthful for these characters being this way to get sort of the point of the critique out, but are sort of problematic, if I can use that terminology of the left, where the left, when it counterants it, because I didn't count, but just use the use of the word faggot a couple of dozen times in this movie. The characters' sort of sexuality is very, very sort of fluid, and the women characters are as messed up as the male characters, and because the movie is mostly centered on this male friendship, some of the I feel like feminists or people on the left would complain about the women being problematic in that the women are like temptresses or something like that. In any case, it just feels like this movie would piss off everyone, and so it wouldn't get made today. And the thing is, it wasn't really. And the thing is, this movie was a huge hit for its budget and of time. So it cost $3 million to make, which would be like $20 million today, and it made $44 million at the box office, which is like $100 million plus today. So it would have been a huge hit in 1969. And the thing is, and I'm not sure if I said this already, but this is the only Best Picture winner to be rated X. Let me sort of explain that. X is the is the former version of NC-17. So if you want to think of it as the NC-17, that's fine. It's exactly the same sort of rating. And it's amazing that this film won Best Picture, because at the time an X rating meant you couldn't play in like half the country because theaters just wouldn't show it, and it still made $44 million at the box office. And so like culturally, it's really weird to me that this movie won Best Picture. And then it feels like this movie just sort of escaped from Hollywood because it couldn't be made today. I don't understand how it was made in 1969 for even such a small budget. And the only sort of thing I can point at, given how unique it is in terms of its content and style for the Academy, is 1969. That's when the Stonewall riots happened. And even though the Stonewall riots so the Stonewall riots basically were the first gay rights action, or the modern gay rights action. So a whole bunch of trans women of color were sick of police repression and started a riot, basically. And of course, LGBT people at that time, even to today's use sex work as a huge source of like income for survival sex. And so I don't know, because Stonewall was like one of the big stories of that year, if that